Hello everyone, my name is Enrico, I'm event manager at Avanscoperta, and I'm here today with Joakim Sundén, consultant at CRISP, author of the book Kanban in Action, and former Agile Coach at Spotify. Hi Joakim.
Hello.
And Claudio Perrone, inventor of PopcornFlow and an Agile and Lean consultant. Ciao Claudio.
Ciao.
Hello. So we've asked Claudio to interview Joakim prior to Joakim's workshop in Milan titled Agile at Scale, inspired by Spotify. So Joakim and Claudio will talk about Agile, the so-called Spotify model, and what it means to truly challenge the status quo in an organization, whether it's small or big. So Claudio and Joakim, over to you.
Hi Joakim. Hey Joakim, how are you, man? It's been a long time.
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. Back in Sweden after a short
your
in Boston
adventure. Yeah, exactly. Now it's funny because like people who are watching this, they don't know, but we met in Stockholm like many years ago, and at a conference, which for me was an international conference. It was my actually very first international conference as a public speaker. So, anyways, the point is we bumped into each other like for several years, like throughout your adventure before Spotify, during Spotify, and now after Spotify, I guess. So I'm really curious actually about your experience over there and also what you did afterwards. But so anyways, the point being is I've seen you like throughout, like at many conferences, doing a lot of talks, and a lot of these talks were about pretty much how we're doing things over here. Okay, it was kind of a snapshot of how Spotify was organized and some of the work you did, and suddenly I hear about a Spotify model. Can you explain what this model is? I don't believe people inside Spotify actually coined that name, but I mean, is there a model, and what it is and what parts of it maybe can be very useful for others?
Yeah, so I remember the Developer Summit, I think it was called, in Stockholm, was my first big conference too. And so when I joined Spotify in 2011, what intrigued me was that I met the first Agile coach at Spotify, who started a few months before I did, was attending another conference in Stockholm and talked about what they were trying to do with really autonomous teams, and they had this idea of having a health check that was driving the development of the team's autonomy and stuff like that. They seem to be really want to push things but yet in a very pragmatic way. Not we're going to do Scrum, but they wanted to find what can we get to work for high performing teams. And soon I started working there, and we started coming up with tribes and guilds and chapters and squads and all of these things. And of course wanted to keep sharing everything that we did that we found that was cool and interesting. And then Henrik Kniberg came in, saw these things too, and he has a real good knack of understanding, putting the concepts down into words and pictures and then sharing it with the world. And all of a sudden people were coming and, oh, we're also doing the Spotify model, and nice, we're using your model. And we were like, whoa, shit, did we actually say that this is a model that others should be using? And we had to actually take a step back and say, what are we actually saying? And no, we're not saying that, but that doesn't mean that that's not how people perceive it. So the Spotify model was in that sense created by others who started picking it up from what we were talking about at conferences and so on, and from the white paper and later the videos that we published. But we've never referred to it as a model internally at Spotify. We've never talked about it as a model, other in the sense that it's a model in the sense of a approximation of what are we doing. Yeah. So although what I can say to describe what people see as the model. I think it is the squad, the chapter, the tribe, the guild, these structural things that are easy to understand and then model in your own organization. And basically, it's we call the delivery team a squad. And then because everyone was also part of a functional team, we call that a chapter. And the real reason why we did that was because we were confused. We were hiring a lot of people, growing, and they said, "Oh, what team are you on?" "Oh, I'm on the backend team." "No, I mean your Scrum team." "I'm not doing Scrum." "Well, your work team." And we just very pragmatically came up with, okay, let's call it squad and let's call it chapter. Had a big meeting, invited everyone. My suggestion was crew, as in work crew, but didn't fly, so it became squad. And that's basically how we did all the things. And pragmatically, we need to grow. How should we organize? Well, what's important? It's we want to keep the context and feeling of being small and related. And I talked about the Dunbar number, the anthropologist Dunbar, who says there's a limit to the amount of people that we can actually form meaningful social connections with. He did studies of tribes and other units of people through the time. And that's where the tribe. Let's call it a tribe. So, but I think that's what the model is: tribes, chapters, guilds, and squads. But then, of course, it's so much more.
Yeah, because before we would have used like terms like, I don't know, communities of practice, and there's been some renaming, of course, but and this is something that people have been really quick on picking up, right? But as you know, I was there. I went to the headquarters in Stockholm, where you were at the office in Boston, it turns out. So we almost met each other over there. But one thing that I noticed was that pragmatism, right? And humility. You already talked about that. And I find actually, coming from the outside, here's another thing that you would see is there weren't many, or I didn't see any, how do you say, zealots? People who really boast about any particular methodology. There was a lot of autonomy on the teams, but also a lot of support, I guess, from the coaching part, from the guild, right? So this reminds me a little bit of that famous Toyota story, right? It's an urban legend, but effectively is, the journalist goes to the Toyota manager and says, "Why do you allow all your competitors to go there and, copy all your tools, Kanban and value stream mapping and 5S's and whatever?" And what the manager said was, what they need to see is not visible. Now, the question I have for you is, can this invisible be taught? Right? Because otherwise we look at the model from the external part of view, the composition, but we kind of miss the soul.
Yeah. So I think that the reason for that pragmatism, if you will, at Spotify, I think that it's manifold. But one reason is that the founders, already from the start, they were successful serial entrepreneurs. So this wasn't their first, it wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme or anything why they started the company. They wanted to build a really, really great organization. Maybe one day a European Facebook or Google. So they believed in employee engagement and building a great culture. They had very clear goals of what they wanted to accomplish, and they had bold goals. And I think that kind of set the culture from an early stage. And it became very goal-oriented. If we want to be able to grow the organization rapidly and be able to deliver fast and outperform Google and Apple and the people that we see will become our competitors. But when I interviewed for Spotify, they said our biggest competitors are Apple and Google. And it would be years before they even had a competing service. They were actually saying streaming music is not the thing. But that's the kind of mindset. And then it became more about what kind of organization do we need to grow in able to be fast and nimble and so on. So it's not an agile transformation where we buy a method or a solution and try to apply that, which probably breeds the kind of zealots that you're mentioning. And also, a lot of the early engineers came from the open source community, where it's very much pragmatism. I have my own problem that I'm solving for me. I don't have to consider all the edge cases and make the perfect solution. I need something that works for the majority of my cases, and which is also a highly collaborative culture. But I think that can you, if you're in an organization that don't have these founders and don't have this culture to start with, and you have a legacy organization, if you will, can it be taught? I like to think so. I mean, we've seen companies transform, but I think it takes a lot of effort and a lot of patience to be able to do that.
Very good.
So
good. It kind of links to me to something I have in mind, which is architecture. We rarely talk about these things, particularly when we talk about organizations. I mean software architecture. I don't know if you're certainly familiar with Conway's law, right? That says organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of those organizations, right? So we have how we organize constraints the designs that we create, and vice versa in a way. And I think it's kind of crucial. And I remember Spotify putting deliberate efforts on organizing the teams in a way that would enable this kind of modular architecture. Can you share something? What's your experience around that? Because of course, like the problem is, like a lot of organizations are, they have a lot of legacy code, and and so they're maybe not organized in a way that would be conducive to what you are talking about.
Yeah. So I think that some people view Conway's law as something that almost that the kind of code or the systems you produce is a copy of your organization, that it's only a one-way thing. To me, it's more of a cycle and back and forth. It's a chicken and egg problem. Did we start the autonomous teams first, or did we? Yeah. So what actually happened was that it co-evolved in a sense. When I joined Spotify, we had what we perceived to be big problems with legacy code. I mean, Spotify had been around for a few years already back then, so maybe not the big legacy systems of today's banks and so on, but it wasn't a microservices architecture. And in 2012, in the beginning, when I think we were maybe 120 engineers or something at the time, when we introduced the tribes or started thinking about tribes, and then we also started thinking about an architectural vision. And we said that in 3 to 5 years, we will be 1,500 engineers. And we will have more than 300 services that we need to maintain. We were really bold about the future plans and wanted to establish an architecture for that. And we need the teams to be able to move independently, newcomers to be productive within a week. Those were the big goals, relating back to your last question, that didn't have anything to do with what kind of organization do we want to build, but what are the actual goals that we need to do. And then we kind of figured out the architecture and the organization based on that. So we said we need microservices that can be independently worked on by squads that have independent missions, because the last thing we want is for a team to be blocked by dependencies to other squads, or having to wait for managers to make decisions. So we slowly built that autonomous organization based on an architecture of microservices. In that sense, definitely Conway's law. And the funny thing is that one of the first things I did was to bring in Jeff Patton to do a product owner training with all the, well, at the time we could actually fit all the product owners, all the designers, and all the engineering managers in a room with Jeff. That's a long time ago. And Jeff Patton, we had dinner, and he said, with all this autonomy and that kind of organization you're building, aren't you risking that it will become a fragmented user experience? Because for the user, it will be one product. And we were like, nah, that's never going to happen, Jeff. And we got that. And fast forward a couple of years, our chief product officer is standing on stage and pointing out, oh, it's apparent, you can see what team has designed what part of the app or the desktop client. We're too fragmented, and we had to have an initiative to deal with exactly that. So yeah, so even if you know Conway's law and all these things, it's not easy to.
Still hard. Yeah, I mean, I always saw as well, like, nobody claimed, that the code was perfect or, whatever. It's always like problem solving and, but again, in a very pragmatic way. Now, here's a question for you. You're Swedish, and I'm Italian, although, I've been living outside Italy now, 18 years. And but I can hear it, right? A lot of people here maybe are Italian. And the classic sentence is, this will never work here because, Spotify is in Sweden, Northern Europe mentality is completely different. It will never work. I mean, you go there, you see a lot of, in Northern Europe, you do see a lot of servant leadership, and there's a lot of command and control as well, of course. But here's the thing, right? You are an experienced coach. You've been coaching well before Spotify and now after, right, in Crisp. What do you say when you see something like that, this kind of reaction? Do you actually think is a different culture, which nothing can be done, it would really work only there?
Well, this is partly a complicated topic, but I've tried to simplify it for myself. I've received this kind of questions or challenges a lot. I've been working with teams from very different cultures. I've been teaching this course or holding this workshop in places like Vietnam and Hong Kong and Africa, and people come to me and say, well, it doesn't really work like that here, because all that's measured is the amount of time you spend sitting on your seat. We don't have any autonomy. And my gut response is, well, if that's the kind of culture you have, do you want to design a method or way of working based on that? Or do you want to try to introduce something that actually challenges that? Because I don't think anyone believes that is the right way to do it. But then what can you actually succeed in doing that? Well, it might be that it's easy for me to say, but I wouldn't want to work with an organization that is very command and controlled oriented and hierarchical. And I think looking at the globalization and how easy engineers and others can get a job as a nomad working for a company on the other side of the world, where we're demanding much more autonomy over our lives in all aspects of it, I don't see a future for these kind of organizations that are rigid and command and control and top steered.
Absolutely. Maybe even one thing to add is, was John Seddon said, culture comes for free. Essentially, is an outcome of, the systems you put in place. You work on the systems, and then a certain culture emerges. And so, maybe if we take that view, is actually, it's not so much about challenging the existing culture. Is what kind of culture would you rather have, and what kind of system can we put in place so that culture may emerge, I guess.
Absolutely.
That's the way I kind of look at it. Obviously it's always a struggle with command and control, but in many ways we would be possibly out of a job if everything was so easy that everybody would do it. But I see it as a personal challenge as well sometimes.
Yeah. So if I was in an organization where leaders and managers don't agree that this is where we need to go, the saying, if you can't change your organization, change your organization. I would
exactly. Change the company or change the company.
A much more interesting challenge, though, is when people actually want to do it, but they're not sure how. They don't exactly know how should our behaviors change and so on. And that's what I've actually chosen to work with. I could say some of it in North America with American managers having a slightly different view than Swedish. Typically, it's a generalization, of course. And then it's a lot of working with management and leadership and understand how do you actually need to change. You need to be asking other kind of questions. Like when you go from a very project-driven world where you ask, are all the requirements done? Are we going to deliver on date, on scope, on budget, and what kind of questions do you ask?
Predictability.
So it's also about formalizing those questions. I think that's what we did a very good job at Spotify. For instance, saying that this is the kind of squads we want to have. They should be autonomous, be easy to release. They should have an influence over what they're building, and together crafted a vision. This is what we need to go. And then we're constantly asking the squads, are you getting there? Are you getting there? And that's both an aspirational and socializing the vision, but it's also supplying them with a bill of rights, basically saying, if you're not there, we're failing as an organization, and you should demand support and changes from us.
Very good. So, okay, look, I have a last question for you, and which is about your workshop. So you're going to be in Milan and doing this Agile at Scale inspired by Spotify. Can you tell us a little bit about that? You know, who should attend and what this is all about?
Yeah, so it's me and a colleague at Crisp who has actually been a consultant with Spotify for several years in 2 different occasions. So it's our gathered experience from having worked a total of maybe 10 years together at Spotify, and from going through this journey and learning a lot of interesting patterns, anti-patterns, good practices, bad practices, what has been working, what has not been working, and more about creating a really great place to work that can support an organization that wants to be agile at scale, which is a lot of that pragmatism that I've been talking about, having clear goals and trying to find out how to get there through lots of experiments, trying lots of different things, and kind of explaining to people what that looks like. What are some steps you can do? What are some things you can do to go that route, rather than I like to contrast agile at scale with scaling agile, which is more, okay, we have Scrum, then we have Scrum of Scrums, then we have Scrum of Scrum of Scrums, and Scrum of Scrum, you know. It's applying a method and believing that you just have to scale it until you reach the limit of the corporation. I don't think it's that simple.
The opposite is also those kind of really kind of big recipe driven. This is how we organize the entire delivery, you know, which. Yeah, you know, we can talk all day long about, you know, it's easier to buy a recipe, and you know, but you know, are we agile there? Are we actually learning anything, or are we just applying some practice?
Yeah, so we're giving people some recipes, but it's more like a base recipe. How do you combine this with other recipes and tailor them and customize them? Things like the what I just told you, like being really clear on what is a great team, what does an autonomous squad mean in our context, if that's what we want to go after, and how do you then put mechanisms in place, and how do you organize management and leadership in order to support that vision? How do you allow teams to do it? Where do you put boundaries? Where do you let people be autonomous and decide? And a lot of that, what we've learned through.
Yeah, very good. So it seems like you start from the outcomes, what you really want, and then you run experiments. I like that. Sounds familiar to what I'm doing on my side, I guess. And so, yes. Very good. very good.
We've of course used PopcornFlow many times in different situations at Spotify.
It's always good to hear.
Okay, so thanks both of you. I guess that was a nice chat we had, and tack Joakim, and grazie mille Claudio. You'll find some more information in the YouTube description of this video, and we hope to see you in Milan. Would you like to add anything before we close, guys?
No, thank you for doing this and taking your time. It was great catching up a little bit with you, Claudio, and great to see you too, Enrico.
We should do this more often.
Yeah.
Even with our recordings, of course.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone then. Thanks for your attention. Thanks, guys, and see you soon. Ciao, ciao.
Arrivederci.
Bye-bye.
Bye.